Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, March 29th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Israel thinks that only 60 to 70 hostages are still alive. So Israel believes that only 60 to 70 Israeli hostages in Gaza are alive out of the 134 people and bodies that are being held in the Strip, as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is sabotaging chances for a hostage deal with Hamas. And this was reported by Haaretz on Thursday. So the Israeli military previously confirmed at least 36 of the hostages had been killed. That was something I remember covering a few months ago, that Israel said around 30 of the hostages were killed. And that includes some who actually died on October 7th, and some of them were brought back into Gaza when they were already dead. They brought the bodies back. And a source told Haaretz that now only 60 to 70 are still alive, and actually said that the number may even be lower than that. And of course, we can't know for sure exactly how all these hostages died, but I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that many were, if not all of them, were killed by the Israeli bombing campaign, or maybe of disease or starvation due to the Israeli blockade. I'm sure it seems to me that it would be in Hamas's interest to keep these hostages alive. So we know there have been some confirmed cases of Israel killing Israeli hostages inside Gaza. Some of the Israeli hostages who were freed in the initial, the only hostage deal that was reached that led to a 1-week truce back in November, some of them said after they got out that their primary fear while being held in Gaza was being killed by Israel's relentless bombing campaign. In December, Israeli troops gunned down 3 Israeli hostages who were shirtless and waving a white flag in Gaza City. I'm sure everybody remembers that. And then there was also a mother of an Israeli who died in Gaza, and she's alleged that her son was killed by poison gas. And, the thing that people, and she was citing a toxicology report, and what immediately went to people's minds was maybe Israel was pumping gas into the tunnels. But then I saw there was a report in Israeli media that said the Israeli military is aware that bombing the tunnels could create toxic gas, such as carbon monoxide, which risks killing the captive Israelis that are down there. So this news of the estimate that only 60 to 70 hostages remain alive comes as family members of Israelis being held in Gaza are increasing the pressure on Netanyahu to reach a deal. So some of these family members held a meeting with Netanyahu on Thursday, and beforehand, one of them said, quote, "Prime Minister Netanyahu, the responsibility to bring our sons home is yours. At the request of the state and the security forces, we stayed silent until today. They scared us. Today, we understand that as the number of days of silence grows, the number of boys who return home alive decreases," end quote. So senior Israeli officers working for Major General Nitzan Alon, who's one of the Israeli negotiators, and this is one of the Israeli officials going over to Qatar to actually negotiate. And they're not negotiating directly with Hamas through mediators, but these are people that are working on the negotiations. And they told Haaretz that Netanyahu has been purposely stalling negotiations with Hamas. One source said, quote, There are increasing signs that he's done almost everything possible to postpone, delay, and ruin the chance of a deal to release the hostages in exchange for terrorists," end quote. So one example of Netanyahu's obstruction of a deal is his talk of killing senior Hamas officials, including the group's leader, Yahya Sinwar. So Sinwar, Netanyahu recently was saying how they have to kill Sinwar. And these Israeli officials believe that if they take out Sinwar, then Israel might find itself without anyone capable of negotiating for Hamas. So they're not happy with Netanyahu, and that's the family members and the Israeli officials actually working on the negotiations. And the reason I think this is important is because you see so many people, defending what Israel's doing in Gaza, saying, oh, if Hamas just released the hostages, this would all be over. Well, that's not true. The priority is not the hostages. The priority is destruction and taking over as much of the Gaza Strip as they can. All right, so the next one here, the Pentagon is in early talks on funding a Gaza peacekeeping force. And of course, peacekeeping is in quotes there. So U.S. officials are in preliminary talks about ways to stabilize a post-war Gaza, including a proposal for the Pentagon to fund a peacekeeping force. This was reported by Politico on Thursday. U.S. officials told the outlet that the proposal does not involve U.S. boots on the ground, but could be a multinational force or Palestinian-led. Officials said that it could be weeks or months before any plan is approved, but realistically, there's no end to this thing in sight. And there's a lot of reasons why something like this isn't going to be worked out anytime soon, I think. The report said that any regional countries, any Arab countries that might be involved in the multinational force, they want Israel to commit to a two-state solution before seriously discussing these kind of plans. And we've seen Netanyahu, his government, and the Israeli Knesset all express strong opposition to a Palestinian state. Netanyahu has said it's never going to happen. So Netanyahu has also unveiled a plan for a post-war Gaza that includes Israel maintaining the freedom to operate in the Strip without a time limit, which requires a long-term military occupation. So this is one of those examples. We see this. You see Biden administration officials say, oh, yeah, we need a two-state solution. That's what we're going to work on. And then you have the Israeli officials immediately reject those things when they say them. And so, on one hand, they say that this is something they're discussing, but I don't think it's very realistic. And also the fact that this would be U.S. funded, from the Palestinian perspective, they would oppose any sort of military force, U.S.-backed military force, occupying the territory. So the Politico report said that Israel is reluctant to have conversations about the future situation in Gaza as it continues its military operations, which continues the slaughter. The death toll, the latest from Gaza's health ministry, is around 32,500. And again, that's a low estimate. Thousands and thousands of people are missing under the rubble. So this is, this all just continues. And this seems to be, just the fact that they're discussing this, I thought was worth covering. But, it even says in the report that Israel doesn't want to talk about this right now. So it's not something they can really do without the Israelis' approval. All right, so the next one here, thousands of protesters surround the Israeli embassy in Jordan for the fourth day. So this article is from Middle East Eye. So there's been huge protests around the Israeli embassy. And this continues for a fourth day on Thursday. And I think they're still there now that it's Friday in Jordan. Mohammed al-Absi is one of thousands of Jordanians who have been surrounding the Israeli embassy in Amman for the last 4 days. He is clear about their intentions. He said, quote, "Our protests will continue until the war on Gaza comes to an end. The protests are expanding to other cities and governments. We will call for demonstrations in multiple locations," end quote. So it marked the fourth consecutive day that thousands of protesters have come out on the streets of the Jordanian capital. So this is actually saying Wednesday was the fourth day. So that means Thursday was the fifth day. And young demonstrators tried to breach the security cordon established around the complex by Jordanian security forces, resulting in the arrest of approximately 200 protesters. While the embassy is currently without a diplomatic mission after Israel's ambassador left Amman in October and Jordan recalled its ambassador in November, in protest of the ongoing war in Gaza, Al-Absi said the protesters have heard that the embassy has partially resumed operations. So this is interesting. Jordan is a very it's an interesting situation there because a lot of I think about half of their population is Palestinian refugees, and they are very close with the U.S., the government, and they get a lot of military aid from the U.S., and they do work with the Israelis on certain things. And this is always kind of a point of discontent between the population and the government and King Abdullah. And so there's always a potential of something big like this happening, or something even bigger than this happening. And this is why when the U.S. troops were killed at that base, Tower 22 in Jordan on the Syrian border, why initially Jordan said, no, it didn't happen on our side of the border. A lot of people thought that's because the U.S. didn't want people to think American troops were killed in Syria, because that's an illegal military occupation. But it's really that base, that was a secret base. It was secret to the people of Jordan, and Jordan did not want to highlight their military relationship with the U.S. at the time. All right, so the next one here, the ICJ orders Israel to ease grip on Gaza aid. So this article is from Will Porter at the Libertarian Institute. It says the International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to relax its blockade on aid shipments into Gaza, saying that Tel Aviv must stop interfering with deliveries as Palestinians face dire food and medicine shortages. In a ruling issued on Thursday, the ICJ pointed to the spread of famine and starvation in the Gaza Strip, observing that the crisis was the result of Israel's extensive restrictions on the entry and distribution of humanitarian aid and commercial goods. The court ordered Tel Aviv to allow supplies into the territory unhindered and in full cooperation with the UN, prohibiting any action that would obstruct aid deliveries. The ruling also stressed an urgent need to increase the capacity and number of open land crossing points into Gaza and to maintain them open, as there is no substitute for land routes and entry points. And this is something a lot of these aid groups are saying. They're saying open more land crossings instead of dropping aid. Dropping aid seems to be very dangerous. A dozen people drowned to death trying to get some of it, and 5 people were crushed when the parachutes didn't open. The latest ruling came at the request of South Africa, which filed a case with the ICJ last year, arguing that Israel's assault on Gaza had violated the Genocide Convention. So this is another ruling from the ICJ, and of course the U.S. is going to say, oh, this, we don't agree with the ruling, and Israel isn't going to follow it. But this stuff, I think, as it builds up, we hope that this pressure, this international pressure, eventually has some impact enough to get Biden to stop this thing. All right, so the next one here, this is a really horrific story. Just skin and bone, the starving Gaza children kept in incubators. This article is actually from the Daily Mail, which I never thought I would run an article from the Daily Mail that's related to Israel, but it just says what's happening in the horror show, just the horrific situation for these children in Gaza hospitals. And this one toddler named Lila Janid, the pictures of her, I'm not sure exactly how old she is, but she looks very young, maybe just a few months old. And she's just skin and bones. And you could see in these pictures, it's like, how is this, this is what the U.S. government is supporting with our tax dollars, is this war on children, the starvation of children. There's also this 9-year-old boy, and this is in the northern Gaza Strip. And, you just see these pictures. They're just horrific. I really put this in for the pictures so people would see. So if you're listening, go check it out. It's tough to look at, but, I think you got to face some of this stuff. And of course, man, I tweeted out that article, and you have people defend it, saying, oh, what about Hamas in the comments? It's really, really despicable. All right, so the next one here, Israeli soldiers shoot and kill 2 unarmed Palestinian men in Gaza. This is from Al Jazeera. So this is another video that was leaked of Israeli forces shooting 2 unarmed men who were walking down the beach. And this was in northern Gaza. I believe it was in the north, southwest of Gaza City. And at least one of them you can see is waving a white flag. At least one of the two men repeatedly waved what appeared to be a white fabric in a sign of surrender and to show that there was no threat. They were near the Nablus roundabout southwest of Gaza City and were trying to return to their homes in the north of the Strip via Al-Rashad Street, the only possible route. An Al Jazeera correspondent said that is where they encountered the Israeli soldiers. And after they kill these guys, after they shoot these guys, these two guys, and you could see in the video, one is like frantically waving what it looks like is a white flag with both hands up in the air, waving. And we've seen this several times. You know, this has been caught on video multiple times. Israel shooting people with white flags, including one of the Israeli hostages that they killed. And then right after they killed them, Israeli bulldozers bury the bodies. They try to conceal the crime. So this is another reason to think that the death toll is low, because is this something that they've been doing a lot, is just burying bodies after they kill people? Because they always have these bulldozers around, you know. So just another one of these videos that, you know, this is all, I think, helping to turn the public opinion on Israel here in the U.S. with just all this stuff that keeps coming out. All right, so the next one here, Russia says the terrorist attack has a Ukraine connection. So Russian investigators said Thursday that they found evidence connecting the terrorist attack on a concert hall outside of Moscow to Ukrainian nationalists. Investigators have verified, so this is a quote from the Russian Investigative Committee. This is a statement they put out. They said, quote, investigators have verified information that large amounts of money and cryptocurrency that the perpetrators of the terrorist attack received traced back to Ukraine. The funds were used in preparing the crime. Investigators work with the detained terrorists, the examination of technical equipment that was seized from them, and the analysis of information about financial transactions prove their connection to Ukrainian nationalists, end quote. So Russia is now saying that they have evidence linking these people to Ukrainian nationalists, and it's not clear exactly what that means. But it's, you know, if Russia determines that Ukraine was behind this, or, you know, things could really escalate, and by extension, they would view it as an attack backed by the U.S. So the ISIS affiliate based in Afghanistan, known as Islamic State Khorasan Province, or ISIS-K, has taken credit for the shooting, which killed over 140 people. Putin has said radical Islamists carried out the attack, but also suggested that there was a link to Ukraine. He said that publicly. The U.S. has said from the very beginning that the attack was carried out by ISIS-K and dismissed the idea that Ukraine was involved. So listen to this quote. This is John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman. In response to Russia putting out this statement, this is what Kirby says. He said, quote, "My uncle used to say that the best manure salesmen often carry their samples in their mouths. Russian officials seem to be pretty good manure salesmen," end quote. And he added that the statement was nonsense propaganda. So to hear that from Kirby, calling them manure salesmen, all this stuff that he's been spewing about Gaza, all these lies and justifications for mass murder that he's putting out there. I mean, the nerve of that guy. But anyway, you know, again, the concern of escalation here. The question is, if Russia's making this claim that they have evidence, are they going to show us? Are they going to present any evidence? But I think that we just have to be, you know, hopefully they don't. I don't think Russia's going to attack NATO or attack the U.S. I think it's clear that they don't want to do that, that they're not going to take things to that level. But you never know what could happen in response to something like this. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. did not give Russia all the information that it had about the Moscow terrorist plot. So this article, I wrote this article, but it's based on a New York Times report that said the U.S. did not share all the information it had about a terrorist plot in Russia ahead of the shooting at a concert hall outside of Moscow that killed over 140 people. The paper said, quote, "The adversarial relationship between Washington and Moscow prevented U.S. officials from sharing any information about the plot beyond what was necessary out of fear Russian authorities might learn their intelligence sources or methods, end quote. So it's basically saying that they didn't give them all the information that they had about this attack because of the relationship because of the state of relations with Russia. I mean, that's all it is here. And this reminds me, I think it was like the day before this happened, Scott Horton sent me an article from Washington Times about ISIS-K, and it was saying, well, ISIS-K is targeting Iran, the Taliban, Russia, and the U.S. is in this awkward position where they don't know if they should share the intelligence with their adversaries because they don't want them to use the intelligence to their advantage. So basically saying that they don't want to help stop ISIS attacks because they don't want to give too much information to these countries. So in response to the report, the Kremlin responded, and Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman, said that he was unaware of information about the U.S. withholding intelligence, and he also cast doubt on the report. He said, quote, "The information of the New York Times citing sources is information that should be treated with great caution," end quote. So the warning that the U.S. put out was very specific. The U.S. Embassy in Moscow issued a public warning on March 7th that specifically warned Americans in Russia that extremists had imminent plans to target large gatherings in Moscow, including concerts. And then they said to avoid large gatherings for 48 hours. The U.S. also passed this along to Russia and probably some other information privately. The Russian FSB chief said that the U.S. warning was of a general nature, so I guess nothing too specific. And then you had U.S. officials who were speaking to the New York Times said that Russia tightened security after the warning, but may have relaxed it after an attack did not happen in the 48-hour window. The report said it was unclear if U.S. intelligence was wrong about the timing of the attack or if the perpetrators noticed the heightened security and decided to wait. So ISIS-K took credit for the massacre. As I mentioned, I kind of just went over the stuff that I went over in the last article. This is interesting. It's strange. This whole story is strange. The specific U.S. warning, the U.S. immediately saying it was ISIS, no links to Ukraine before Russia said anything. So we'll see how this all plays out. All right. So the next one here, the Philippines vows a response to China. So on Thursday, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. vowed a response to China's actions in the South China Sea as tensions in the disputed waters continue to grow. In a statement on X, Marcos said that he had been meeting with members of the country's national security and defense leadership to craft a plan to, quote, protect and secure our sovereignty, sovereign rights, and jurisdiction while ensuring peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific, end quote. Marcos continued, quote, over the succeeding weeks, there shall be implemented by the relevant national government agencies and instrumentalities a response and countermeasure package that is proportionate, deliberate, and reasonable in the face of the open, unabating, and illegal, coercive, aggressive, and dangerous attacks by agents of the China Coast Guard and the Chinese Maritime Militia, end quote. So it was a very long way of saying that they're going to announce some sort of response to what China's been doing in the South China Sea. And since he came into office in 2022, Marcos has taken a much harder line against China's claims to the South China Sea, breaking from the more Beijing-friendly policies of his predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte. At one point, Duterte said he was going to kick the U.S. out of the Philippines. I wish he did that. So Marcos has been emboldened by the U.S., which is increasing its military presence in the Philippines and is stepping up patrols in the South China Sea. So the reason why I cover this so much, this maritime spat between the Philippines and China, is because the U.S. has repeatedly vowed that the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty applies to attacks on Philippine vessels in the South China Sea, meaning the U.S. is willing to intervene if this maritime dispute turns into a shooting war. the U.S. actually formalized this. They added new guidelines to the U.S.-Philippine treaty last year to say explicitly, yes, this applies to the South China Sea. So who knows what these countermeasures are going to be, but there's been all these encounters between Chinese and Philippine boats, and they sometimes there's collisions. The most recent one, the Chinese boat fired a water cannon, and then the Philippines said there was significant damage to the Philippine boat, and some of the crew was injured. So this could escalate. It's definitely something to keep an eye on. All right, so the next one here, Niger says that the U.S. will submit a plan to disengage troops. So Niger's Interior Ministry has said that the U.S. will submit a plan to disengage its troops from the West African nation. This was reported by AFP. So earlier this month, Niger's military-led government, which took power after a July 2023 coup, said that it was ending its military agreement with the U.S. and that the U.S. military presence was no longer legally justified. Despite the order, the U.S. is looking to stay in Niger and has said it's seeking clarification from the Nigerian government, which is known as the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland, the CNSP. So U.S. Ambassador Kathleen Fitzgibbon met with Niger's Interior Minister on Wednesday to discuss the issue. And the Niger said that Fitzgibbon said that the U.S. had taken note of the decision by Niger to withdraw from the military agreement and would be coming back with a plan on the methods for disengaging its troops from the country. So it sounds like Niger is saying the U.S. said, okay, we're going to have a plan to withdraw. But the State Department was asked about this statement from Niger and refused to comment, which is kind of strange. State Department spokesman Matt Miller said, quote, "I don't want to get into what, from our perspective at least, are private diplomatic conversations," end quote. So we'll see, hopefully, again, that this turns into the U.S. leaving Niger. They have a big drone base there that they don't want to give up. They're in talks with other West African nations about opening drone bases there. But they're still trying to hold on. They're still trying to stay in Niger. All right, so the last story here. House Speaker Johnson wants to pass the big foreign military aid bill. So this article is from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute, and it says House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, says that he will work to pass a massive military aid bill for Ukraine and Israel once Congress returns to session next week, a move that could trigger a backlash from some members of his party. House Democrats have vowed that they will protect Johnson if some Republicans try to kick him out from the speakership. House Democrats are saying that they're willing to not vote against him to save him. So Johnson has underscored the urgency of providing aid to Ukraine and Israel, declaring it a top priority upon the House's return from Easter recess. He said, quote, "We'll turn our attention to it and we won't delay on that," end quote. So we'll see. I mean, the status of this bill, this is a $95 billion foreign military aid bill. It includes aid for Taiwan, Ukraine, Israel. The thing is a monstrosity. It's passed the Senate already, and if it gets brought to that floor of the House for a vote, it's probably going to pass. I think it would pass pretty easily, but the Republicans who don't want it to be brought have a significant amount of power to prevent it, but I think it's probably just a matter of time. There's also that discharge petition that Democrats are trying to get signed. They need something like 218 signatures. I think that would bypass Johnson and force the vote. So hopefully they don't get the signatures. John Walsh had a story for us telling people to contact the 22 Democrats who haven't signed it yet to tell them, good for you for sticking to your guns. They're mostly progressives. I think it's over their opposition to the aid for Israel. All right, so that's it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Jonathan Cook. Assange's reprieve is another lie, hiding real goal of keeping him endlessly locked up. One from Khalil Sayeg. This Easter, Gaza's Christians community on the brink of extinction. And it's a good piece about the situation for the Christians in Gaza at the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church that are there, which have both been attacked. The Orthodox Church was bombed, and 2 women were killed by IDF snipers at the Catholic Church, and a few people were shot and wounded when they were trying to help them. And the author said that his father, I believe the author is based here in the U.S., but said his father died of a heart attack at the Catholic Church because it was surrounded by tanks. He couldn't get any kind of the proper medical care. So it's a really horrific situation. One from Julia Gledhill and William Hartung, Failure as the Pentagon's Ultimate Success Story. One from Sheldon Richmond, Leave TikTok Alone. And one from Anel Sheline, who just resigned from the State Department, Why I'm Resigning from the State Department. So that's the op-ed that she wrote for CNN that I went over some of it yesterday, but definitely go check that out. Go check out our blog. That's everything for me. That's it for the week. I hope everyone has a good weekend. Happy Easter for those who are going to be celebrating. I'm going to work because I work Sunday and then record Sunday night for the show on Monday. I'm going to be working Sunday. I'm going to start a little late for Easter, but I'll be business as usual for next week. There'll be a show on Monday. But that is it for me. You could always follow us on Instagram, Twitter, share this show, like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. Leave reviews if you listen to the podcast. But I'll be back after the weekend. I'll talk to you then. Thanks for listening.